Welcome to Stoughton Media Access Cable. My name is Steve Kelly and I'm going to be your host today. And today I have the privilege of introducing you to Jorge Cardoso. Jorge is an educator that's traveled all around the world and he has some great news to share with you. So Jorge.
Nice to see you.
Welcome.
Steve.
So
Beyond your
Jorge
show.
is a former college dean,
Yeah.
right? A college professor.
Yes, sir.
Director of several schools, right? And Jorge has this interesting way to go through life and that I think will benefit anyone who gets a chance to hear him. So one of the things I've noticed about Jorge is we all get kicked around occasionally in life, and Jorge has been able to just spread his wings on each of those occasions and make the best of it in a way that's incredible. He's also here, I think, to talk to us a little bit about his own company and how to create learning in new and fresh ways. So, Jorge, tell me a little bit of your story.
I'm flattered with your introduction, Steve.
Okay.
Thank you so much. I hope to live up to that intro.
No, I'm sure you will.
Well, what you said is true. Education, I've been a lifelong educator. Except for some years when I was in college when I worked for UPS. But after college, I started teaching at Cambridge Latin School. I started teaching in 1977, and I may have been one of the few who survived, young teachers of that vintage, who survived Proposition 2.5. It came in 1980, and I was very fortunate to not have been laid off. Because I had worked on a grant that got funded. And so 2 years after I was hired, I might have been let go, except that I had worked on this grant and got a position funded by that grant. It was a federal grant. So I was able to stay and continue to work for the city of Cambridge for 22 years, becoming a teacher, an administrator, a head of a school at the Cambridge Latin School, head of grant programs and things like that. It was a wonderful opportunity before I went on to met you at, can we say it? Cambridge College?
Of course, Cambridge College. Before you go on, your roots are in New Bedford.
That's right.
And I want to also have you touch upon the bilingualism.
Sure.
Has been so much a part of your ability to have these resurgences at every opportunity. So.
Well, I've been blessed. That's a term that I find myself using a lot. Blessed suggests a kind of religious quality. It's a little bit better than saying I've been lucky, because luck, as you know, if you say that things happen to you because of luck, it's kind of a roll of the dice kind of thing, and it has nothing to do with you. There is a quality about things that everything that happens to you has your own, part of it is your own efforts and your own preparation. But then there's also a bit that comes from something else, something greater than yourself.
Okay.
Maybe it's the principle of the universe, maybe it's God, I don't know, but I have been blessed. And so, yes, I grew up in New Bedford. My family emigrated from Portugal when I was 5 years old. I started school not knowing a word of English. It was pretty tough, and there were no bilingual programs back then. And I remember distinctly getting to 8th grade, and a lot of Portuguese immigrant boys sitting there who were they were 15 and turning 16, and they were still in 8th grade. They weren't going to ever go to high school because they just couldn't cut the mustard. And, you know, they had facial hair.
That's scary for a young boy.
Well, somehow I managed to, maybe because I arrived younger than they, and you know, when you're very young, you absorb language quickly. So I was very fortunate, and somehow I managed to do pretty good in school. I was always, and then again, I've done a lot of thinking about this. But I remember particularly, and these were nuns. These were nuns. Lovely, lovely ladies, really. I remember this Asian nun who was particularly kind to me. But she sort of brought out the best of me, and I really wanted to learn and do well because I wanted to please her, you know? And I think that at the end of the story, education is a very person-to-person thing, and unlocking the key to learning it's a one-on-one kind of a proposition. You know, it's the information, but it's also that relationship. So that was a kind of turning point in my school career, and it helped. It went a distance. Then in high school, I also had a teacher who was also of Portuguese background and who was a role model for me, and he really sort of brought out the best in me then also. So, yeah, I was. I may have been an outlier, I think, in some ways. You know, kind of. Among people of my cousins, say, who emigrated, and they never quite had as much traction in their careers and in their educations as I did. So I consider myself fortunate.
I'm very curious, and actually want to add in to this notion that how personal learning is, almost at any age.
Yep.
Where the teachers really can inspire an individual. I think what you said was, I wanted to do good almost to please her.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and I wonder, like, how much of that is missing with this, with the new wave of education, let's say?
Yeah. Well, I think that it runs parallel with this, with things like Common Core and standardized things. I actually find myself thinking that there's a core of good qualities about all of this testing and measurement. And I mean, when I began teaching at Cambridge Regional Latin School, it was chaotic. It was really a chaotic school. In 1977, when I started teaching there were broken beer bottles at the end of every weekend outside the building. The building itself was in shambles. My kids had to wear winter coats in the wintertime because the windows were in such poor repair. It was an old building, and the community had lost faith in education and wasn't investing in its schools. Anyone who had any means back then in Cambridge was sending their kids to either Catholic schools or private schools. So the public schools were suffering. And somewhere along that time, there was a sea change in public opinion, at least in the city, and they invested in a new building and invested in better staff development things. But it was chaotic. It was really very chaotic. I'm often reminded of the joke that Milton Berle used to tell, that his school was so chaotic that how did it go? I want to get the punchline correct.
Get the punchline good.
It was sort of like a mental institution. The only difference was you had to show improvement to get out in a mental institution.
So you don't have that, and we wonder about that today even.
No, I think that the standardization, the testing, all of that can work side by side with the personalization. And in fact, I think that it still is a matter of needing to connect to young people, needing to meet them halfway, take them from point A to point B. Today, the point A and the point B is definitely marked off, clearly. Back when I started teaching, there was no sense of point A, point B. It was very loose, very loose. And you still had to you had to connect to kids, but it was a much less formalized. I think education is stronger today than it's ever been in many ways, really.
So let me switch gears a little.
Yeah.
One of the things that's happened to you is you got situated in a job.
Yeah.
And then we had a regime change.
Oh, many.
And then the next thing you know, you were comfortably in a position and someone was knocking on your door and saying, hey, we don't need you anymore. I think this is common in today's business environments.
It certainly is.
So what was your secret to, give me an example, like I think you ended up in Macau, China. I believe you also ended up as the vice rector at the University of St. Joseph's, right? So you go from New Bedford to Cambridge to a world away, having spread your wings, responded to your own, I think personal crisis might be a strong, but responded to your own differing results at work, and you did this incredible sea change idea. Take us through one of those. You know, how, for instance, if you like the thought of telling us about Macau and how you got there.
Sure.
What happened preceding that?
Yeah. You know, I'm going to answer that, I'm going to go back to when I was 19 years old and tell a story.
Excellent.
I'd gone to college because my high school role model, a man named Manuel Samaras, he had studied philosophy. He had a philosophy club after school. We used to sit around and discuss books. And it was the most invigorating, intellectually exciting thing I had ever had in my life. I mean, I'd always enjoyed newspapers and reading and things like that, and the local library. But the notion of sitting around with others and saying, well, what are we going to read? And then just reading and not having any answers at the end of, any questions at the end of the chapter or any correct answers. It was basically, you know, how do you understand this book? And discussing it. That sort of freewheeling exercise was tremendously invigorating, and it sort of opened up what I considered to be the true sort of intellectual challenge of making sense of text. So when I went to college, I wanted to study philosophy. But after 1 year, I realized I wanted something different. So I was one of these backpackers who, you know, traveled all over Europe. If you can believe it, I had $700, and that $700 lasted me 6 months in Europe, including my airfare. I flew on Icelandic Airways. This was 1972, 73, something like that.
Okay.
Icelandic Airways, $149 round trip, Boston to Luxembourg.
And by yourself?
Yeah.
What created this idea?
Well, I had gotten interested in Lapland, and I had heard about this international volunteer service organization, and I had the opportunity to go up to above the Arctic Circle to midnight during the midnight sun time, and basically build houses for seniors.
Wow.
Senior laps is what it was.
Wow.
Back then, and it was a grand idea, and
a grand adventure.
And I did it. Well, I guess at some point, you know, there's something that has to come from somewhere deep inside, and you have to sort of take some risks and to seek out adventure or to follow your heart. And I think that as I've looked back on my life, that was a kind of a critical moment. I could have just sort of said, too dangerous, can't be done, you know, I'm afraid I
run out of money.
I will run out of money. Somehow, you know, when you really seek out things, the universe provides. At every moment in that whole adventure, things fell into place. I would get a ride people would invite me to spend the night. I was offered the meals. There were lots of times when I simply didn't deserve the good fortune that I was given.
Okay.
But ultimately, I did come back to the United States, and having that on my resume was what made the difference in my getting hired in Cambridge. I'm pretty sure of it.
Yeah.
Because I was able to put down that I had volunteered for this project in Finland, and that sort of stood out in a sea of 34 resumes. So, today pretty much everybody talks about, have volunteer service on your resume, and a lot of it is crap. I mean, a lot of it is...
I love the straight talk, by the way.
Sorry.
No, don't be sorry. That's straight talk.
I mean,
a lot of it's crap.
People are very they really angle these things, and it's gamesmanship. But in this case, I wasn't trying to game anything, but in retrospect, I realized that volunteer service was something that stood up, made my resume stand out. In many ways, I think your personal network, I think, always comes into play. In the case of Macau, I was teaching in Beijing. A friend of mine had suggested, I had this terrible fight with the president of the college, as you well know.
Okay, so take us back a year as you got to this.
Okay.
So you're teaching, now you're an assistant dean running a very successful National Institute for Teacher Excellence program.
Yeah,
right?
And I crossed swords with the president of the college. And, in retrospect, it could have all been avoided, and I take some responsibility for the unfortunate debacle. But, things happen in organizations. People work close together, and, little misunderstandings get blown out of proportion, and so forth and so on. Well, anyway, so we crossed swords, and ultimately I was destined to leave, and he was destined to also have some unfortunate repercussions in his career. But talking to friends and so forth, I was looking for something else to do. The friend said, "Why don't you go and teach in Beijing at a university there?" And they're really happy to have people. And so I did that. Again,
I have to interrupt. Wait a minute. We just don't go from you're terminated to, well, I just decided to go to Beijing and teach.
Well,
I mean, you have this incredible resume.
Yeah.
And this incredible willingness to have an adventure.
Yeah.
And to lock everything away at home.
Uh-huh.
And how did that come about? It's not, to me, you rode right over something that's so critical. Well,
you have to be willing to sort of pick up and readjust and reset things. You have to be willing to. In this case, I rented out my place. I put everything in storage, and I spoke to my wife, of course, and she was keen to try that as well. So. Yeah, so I lived and worked in Beijing for a year. While I was there, I had heard that an old colleague from Cambridge Latin School was now the head of a college in Macau. I sent him an email and said, "Hey, do you remember me?" "Well, I'm in Beijing." And he writes back and says, "Hey, I'm going to be there in a couple of weeks." So we met for coffee. Next thing I know, he's invited me to come to Macau. So, it's a big world. There are lots of opportunities. I think you have to have some gumption to follow your instinct, a measure of adventure, a measure of confidence in your ability to respond, a measure of risk-taking is critically important, I think. Otherwise you don't get very far in this life, I don't think. That's your
take on it. So let me take you down another path.
Yes, sir.
So you have a company called Educrescer, right? Is that correct? Did I pronounce it right?
Well, pretty close. Educrescer.
Educrescer.
Crescer, which literally, it comes from education, and in Portuguese, crescer means grow. So it's educational growth is and development is what I think it's all about.
So you've got some 38 years of past teaching experience.
Yes, sir.
Across all countries?
Yeah.
A number of different countries?
Not all countries, but yeah.
You've taught in Brazil?
I did some consulting work in Brazil. I've done some training in Portugal and some consulting there, and teaching in China. California is another country.
The country of California.
Hey, it really is a different place. It's a different place. It's got a whole different mindset over there, I'll tell you. It's not an East Coast Massachusetts place at all. It's significantly different.
Tell us a little bit about that, just for fun. We'll hear something about it. How is California a different country than the whole East Coast, let's say?
Well, they say everything starts on the West Coast and moves east, and I hope that this isn't true, because my experience wasn't very favorable.
Right.
But it seemed to me that unfortunately, California seems a lovely, lovely place. I mean, natural beauty, beautiful weather, but people spend an awful lot of time driving everywhere and being on. I remember in Orange County, there were highways. There were 6 lanes going in each direction, and they were all crawling along.
Yeah,
at
just filled with cars.
5 p.m. to 8 p.m., they were just crawling at 15 miles an hour, all 6 lanes, And then there's a level of I don't know. There's oversensitivity to things. I went to a dentist, and I had your typical questionnaire, are you allergic to latex? Are you allergic to sulfa drugs? Are you allergic to antibiotics? Then there was all these questions like, on a scale of 1 through 10, how do you feel about being lectured to by your dentist? Do you think your dentist has the right to tell you to brush your teeth or perform other habits? Do you feel offended if your dentist chides your
overall dental hygiene?
Yeah, I thought, oh my God, and I also had an experience where I had been on the phone many times with this woman who was in Chicago, and she had a voice that suggested maturity, and she was very knowledgeable. And when I finally met her, she seemed like she was 23 years old, and I said, "Wow, you're very young." And she took offense to that. She felt that I was demeaning her, or that I was playing a seniority card. So there are sensitivities out there that we are only faintly aware of.
Okay.
And if that's the way the world is coming, I don't know if I like it.
No, well, contrast that with you were all the way out in Macau.
Yeah.
So what about the role of being careful around culture there?
Good point. I'm trying to think of a time when cultural sensitivities might have been. I was both in Beijing and in Macau. I was actually very favorably impressed with the deference and the high regard that people have toward teachers. I mean, I had never experienced that kind of high regard in that respect.
In all of your time teaching, both in the college setting in Massachusetts, high school settings in Massachusetts?
Yeah, I mean, there's a, working in Cambridge, you know, parents in Cambridge oftentimes feel like they've got more education, they're smarter than you.
Yeah, okay.
And the kids sort of, it rubs off on the kids. There's a sense of privilege and entitlement sometimes with kids here that, so you don't have that kind of deference. But the students there in China are, it was just a wonderful experience. That's a cultural variable that I was stunned to experience, and it made it a much more pleasant and inspiring experience. And you know that we spoke about earlier about my third grade teacher. I really wanted to please her, and in China, that deference and that respect from students also meant that I really wanted to give them the very best. And it sort of pushed me to wanting to do as good a job as I could possibly do. And I think some of my best teaching took place there. So it gets back to that notion that, you know, education is not just a matter of sort of transmission of knowledge. The sort of personal connectedness between teacher and learner is full of both pitfalls and opportunities for greatness.
So if you were called in as a consultant to, let's say, a local high school region, how do you think you'd start that task? And using, I'm thinking you're drawing from this 35 plus years of teaching across the continents.
Yeah.
Well, how would you start a process like that?
Well, you get called in for specifics. You know, for instance, some staff development, some organizational development, a research project. And let me also, at some point in this interview, I do want to tell you about a research project that I performed here and that has import for this area. But I think the first thing is to find out what people need. And, you know, the more I've spent time in education, the less I feel that there are ready prescriptions, off-the-shelf, over-the-counter prescriptions for what people need. I've become more and more, I think, for education, because of this quality of, it's all about the human culture in the building. Probing the relationships, probing, you know, the challenges is critically important before you come up with. You have to know the symptoms. You have to know the prognosis. You have to come up with a theory of change before you can apply any remedies. So, and there's no off-the-shelf, ready, you know, one-size-fits-all remedies to anything anymore, I think. So it's all person to person, hand to hand.
Give me an idea of a timetable. Is it a month-long process of exploration? I mean, if somebody's watching the show and they're running a school system and they feel they're a little bit in trouble, and I don't want to cast aspersions, but like down in Baltimore right now, I would think that running a school system there has just gotten greatly more difficult because of the recent racial tensions having to do with the police departments.
Sure.
So if somebody were to come across this video and see you speaking about how to make changes in an educational environment, what would they look to engage you for 6 weeks, and how would that exploration go? Well, you know, tell me a little bit about that.
Let me actually give you a specific example. Macau.
Okay.
Okay. So I get asked to come to Macau to teach, and I'm teaching courses in teacher training. But there's also another issue, and that is that the rector, the president of the college, they call them rectors there, feels that the the place in general is not living to its expectations, and that, you know, there's a kind of, generally everyone is pretty happy with the results, but there's the feeling that more could be done. And in my own experience, I realized that 95% of the kids are Chinese. English is a second language for them. They're struggling. All the instruction is in English. Even though it's a Portuguese university, they have abandoned Portuguese as the language of instruction because everyone really wants is to learn in English, because, you know, Hong Kong is next door, and, you know, people, the visitors, many international visitors use English as the language of currency. So people are teaching courses, they're lecturing, and they're doing all the traditional things, assigning readings, assigning writing assignments. The readings aren't being done. The writing assignments are plagiarized. And a lot of people are just lecturing and knowing that it's just going right over most of those kids' heads. So that's make-believe school. That's not real education.
No value there.
There's no real value going on there. So basically, what I came up with after, you know, spending a lot of time with people and so forth, I developed this set of training exercises for the faculty and training exercises for the admitted new students. Those sessions for the students were called, "It's not how smart you are, it's how you are smart."
Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, that's
very.
It's a wonderful quote. I wish I had coined it myself. That's a Howard Gardner line.
Yes. So say it again, because I think
it's not how smart you are, it's how you are smart.
Okay.
Now, the other, so a similar line was Forrest Gump's line in the movie.
Okay.
He sits in the bus with the little girl who becomes his love interest later, and she says, "Hey, are you stupid?" And he says, "My mama says stupid is as stupid does."
Okay.
So that's the flip side of, it's not how smart you are, it's how you are smart. The genius of that turn of phrase is this, that generally we think of being smart as a given quantity, sort of like horsepower. You can't go beyond your horsepower, okay? Is generally the way people think about smart, okay? The fact of the matter is, and Howard Gardner was brilliant to bring this out.
Different levels of intelligence, different ways to be intelligent.
There are different ways to be intelligent, and, you know, the motor, the artistic qualities, the auditory, the visual, all of these things. It was a wonderful thing that he did for the world to bring out how people are smart in different ways, different elements of being smart. But then even within that one part of being smart that schools focus 90% of their energies on, which is linguistic and mathematical second, okay? In the linguistic area, there are ways that you can become smarter. You can apply your skills in a more, in a better way and get better results. So that's what I focused on. Basically, I took students through this exercise where they valued what they knew, the way they understood, but also gave them some skills. So for instance, if English is not your first language and you have a difficult text, there are things that you can do, such as mind mapping as you're reading, writing in the notes, underlining the important things, looking for the topic sentence in the first, usually that's the first sentence of every paragraph. You know, pre-reading, reading the first sentence of every paragraph through reading the summary, then going back and reading in depth, having a sense of where this is all heading. In writing, you know, things like the notion that good writing isn't just the first draft, that it's multiple drafts. The notion, the distinctions such as the difference between a summary, a paraphrase, and a quotation. I mean, a lot of people don't know this, don't know the difference between this, but if it's pointed out and you actually perform some exercises to bear that out so that you become, so you understand those distinctions cold, you can do stuff and not be charged with plagiarism. You can write. You don't have to rely on Wikipedia and copy and paste to turn in your homework. So I had that whole set of activities for the entering students. I also had we did a lot of work with the faculty about how to support learning, how to support understanding, how to use cooperative learning. Cooperative learning, in the middle of, instead of lecturing for 45, 50 minutes, stopping at critical points, having students pair, think, and share, and then report out to make sure that students are continuously following the train of thought. Sometimes that's called dipsticking, just seeing whether kids are getting it. Because otherwise, if you miss kids, if they're not following, it's all for naught. There's no value being added. So there are a lot of ways in which we can add more value to the educational enterprise, and we're not doing it. But it has everything to do with people having skills, having tools, having a metric. In the case of Macau, we had students keep an electronic portfolio. Every year they would submit into their portfolio their best assignments, give reasons. They would also have a questionnaire that basically would track their sense of self-estimate of abilities in being able to read with understanding, support their classroom understanding and comprehension and so forth. And so having the metrics is important. So yeah, that's the kind of thing that I find very exciting in a kind of consulting basis. Now, let me also tell you that that's one of my proudest moments in my career. The other proud moment I had was toward the end of my time at Cambridge College. And it was a research project that I worked on with the Rennie Center for Education Policy. I had attended a debate between the people who had launched the ballot question here in Massachusetts to end bilingual education, and people who were still supporting and wanting to bring that back. And people were talking right by one another. It was the most atrocious thing. People were there was no basis for a common language in the debate. So I met with the fellow who had organized that conference, and I suggested to him that we conduct a research study that would take the data from standardized testing at 4th and 8th and 10th grades, that we would seek out those communities in Massachusetts that had bilingual communities, immigrant, limited English proficient students. We would look for that elementary school, that middle school, and that high school that had kids moving from sheltered English language environments to mainstream the quickest, and where downstream of their experience in English sheltered environments, they were performing best on these standardized tests, measured progress. we also, one of the caveats was that we would eliminate from contention school systems where the limited English proficient students had a low percentage of receiving free and reduced lunch, because we didn't want to have Brookline competing with Fall River or New Bedford.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Brookline has a lot of limited English proficient students whose parents are college professors at Harvard, MIT, and BU and whatnot,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you didn't want to have that to confound the variables. You wanted to have your classic, immigrant, working class, student family portrayed. So it was a huge undertaking, but what we decided is, once we had those things in mind, identified, I and colleagues would go to these schools and interview the principals, the teachers, the students, the parents, to find out what was the magic. What were they doing that was so good?
Mm-hmm.
So we did that, and it turned out that the #1 elementary school was a school here in Medford. The middle school was a school in Framingham, and the high school was Brockton High School.
Right, local to here, yes.
Yes. And I actually went and visited Brockton. I visited all of these schools, and it was, I tell you, there is a way in which when you visit schools, you realize that each one is a world unto itself, and has a culture, and there's a quality about each one of these environments that infuses it. And people in the middle of it sometimes don't really fully know it, but you have to come from outside. You see it right away. It hits you in the face if you know what you're looking for. And of course, if you have the right to go in and sit in on classes and things like that. But Brockton High School has this amazing Rocky Marciano, I call it the Rocky Marciano effect. They don't see the struggles that these young immigrant kids are facing as insurmountable. They see it as an opportunity the struggle is sort of like, they see all these kids as future Rocky Marcianos.
Right, and that's the culture that you could feel coming through.
They build on that. It's not like a disease. It's not a lot of people tend to see children with difficulties as and don't see the promise. They don't see the possibility. These people were seeing the possibilities. They were seeing the promise, not just sort of social symptoms of something that dooms young people forever.
Right.
Okay, and so that was the baseline. But the other thing was that they worked hard at what they did. They had real strategies, and they were using these strategies across the board. Everyone was on board with lots of specific strategies about how to support kids, how to support their learning, and how to help them to the next step. And it was consistent. And that happened in all of those schools. It wasn't chaotic. It wasn't lackadaisical. Easy for me to say. It wasn't lackadaisical. By
the way, I could just interject a little joke. Why is abbreviated such a long word? We think about that, right? So
that's
words.
Very good.
Words are
very
tough.
good.
Yeah,
good.
That's just something I remember. But I also want to say to you that what you're really talking about, I think, is having a strategy.
Yes.
And I'll give you a quick example from my own class that
Sure.
I teach. All right. It's important that you don't make the class a problem. Mm-hmm. Because what happens is in life, I think we tend to be bitchy, if you would. So I'm not sure everybody likes that word, but strategy beats bitching all the time. All right.
Uh-huh.
So just have a good strategy. So I have this situation where we have a lot of students from other countries
Mm-hmm.
in the classes that I teach.
Yeah.
So in this one case, we have these 6 Turkish students and very nice young gentlemen, and they're in the class and they sit beside each other. And of course, they can't resist but to speak in Turkish,
Sure.
sometimes trying to clarify, other
Sure.
times perhaps just talking about the weather. I don't know what they talk about. And it became a problem, a real source of aggravation in the classroom. How am I going to get these students to be more mindful so that I can use this dipstick technique that you
Yep.
mentioned, where we're checking in. We want to see how you're doing okay.
Yeah.
So strategy beats bitching all the time. I was sort of getting tired of my own attitude with the refrain or reaction.
Yeah.
So I went to a break, and when I came back from break, it just hit me like that. I said, all right, when we come back from break, everybody sit next to a student from another country. Problem solved. So every Turkish student had a person between them, right?
And
they didn't
feel
singled out.
Singled out.
No,
yeah.
because we had Chinese students, Japanese students, we have all these different students. So South American students. So everyone had to kind of make this change.
Sure.
Eliminated this whole problem of kibitzen during class.
Yep.
And had a much better class. And it was really the professor's responsibility to figure that out.
Yeah.
To have a strategy and not to allow learning to not take place because they weren't up to the task.
Yeah.
And I felt I had been doing that.
I think that's a brilliant example of having strategies, quivers. Oh, the quiver is the container for the
Yes.
arrows, isn't it? Yes. Having lots of strategies in your quiver.
So before we go on, I'm going to cue up Roy Cohen. So Roy is out in the control room.
Yeah.
And we're going to run the credits. And we also want to say thank you. Roy's a wonderful volunteer. We have Leo McGowan in studio, who does a great job on the cameras. And we're going to try to run the credits right now. And we'll come back after the credits, and we'll have Jorge explain a little bit more and maybe talk a little bit about what his company does and a few more hints about education.
Hi, it's Gary LaPierre, and the crew wants to thank Maxie's Delicatessen. That's at 117 Sharon Street in Stoughton. They're 781-341-1662. American Cancer Society, yes, they're looking for volunteers. Drive cancer patients to and from their treatments. 1-800-ACS-6662. Or just go to www.cancer.org. Ilsa Mark's Food Pantry in St. Anthony's Free Market, 2 Park Avenue in Stoughton. For more information, call Christine Gallagher. That's at 781-341-0611 or 781-341-0549. Meals on Wheels. Just ask for Jessica. You'll find her at 781-344-8882, extension 2. Stoughton Penny Saver. Our business is advertising your business, they tell us. 27 Rose Glen Street, Stoughton, 781-344-4833. Community Forum showtimes in Stoughton. It's Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday at 6 p.m., Monday at 8 p.m., Tuesday at 5 p.m. It's on Comcast Channel 9 and Verizon Channel 28. All comments and suggestions welcome. Contact us at communityforum1@yahoo.com. Community Forum showtimes in Easton. Mondays at 9 p.m., Tuesday at 8 a.m., Wednesdays 3 p.m., Saturday 10 a.m. And that too, Comcast Channel 9, Verizon Channel 22. Samaritans, they're at 41 West Street on the 4th floor in Boston, 02111. Their phone number is 617-536-2460. 24-hour helplines for Samaritans, and the number is 877-870-HOPE. That's 877-870-4673. Samaritans, you can find them at 800-252-TEEN. That's 252-8336. Or find them online at SamaritansHope.org.
Well, welcome back. We're here with Jorge Cardoso from Educrescer, all right? And George has had a wonderfully varied life in education. But before we go on, we also want to thank one of our sponsors, Maxie's. Maxie's. And Maxie's is doing a wonderful thing called the Mugs for Life Project. And for $20, you can get one of these beautiful mugs. I have one here. I'll have Roy and Leo cue in. So here's the mug right here. And you can zero right in. All right, it's a beautiful mug. And for $20, you'll get this mug. But the really good thing about the mug is that all of the money that you contribute is going to go to the Sumner Redstone Burn Center at Mass General Hospital. So 100% of the funds, and that'll go to equipment, different services, education for patients and family. It's a wonderful thing. So we hope you'll avail yourself of that wonderful mug and create good things. All right, and we also have one more. We're going to have to see if I can read this now. Price Right has come to town in Stoughton. It's an exciting supermarket, and it's growing. And I'm working fast and furious to get my glasses out of my pocket so I can finish reading this to you guys. All right, and there it is. So they're now accepting applications for a new store. Part-time cashiers, supervisors, carts, meat produce, deli, overnight stockers. Please do apply online, www.pricerightsupermarkets.com. Please note there are no in-store applications right now. And there is no company representative at the location. And they would just prefer it if you go online. So Price Right, 666 Washington Street, Stoughton, Mass., and they are an equal opportunity employer. And again, we're with Jorge Cardoso. His email is educrescer@gmail.com. And I think that's it on our credits. Waiting to see. Here we go. All right. Welcome back, Jorge.
Hey.
All right. So you saw some fast work with those glasses?
I did. I was impressed.
Trying to pull them out quick enough. So as we move toward the end of our interview, as I think of someone with as much experience as you have, how would you like to characterize what can be done with education? What are the challenges? And for me, I'll also add that sort of a pet peeve is that I see education going right now in a direction of creating less value instead of more value. And in terms of college tuitions, for instance, incredibly high tuitions that I often wonder, would it not be better to have a student put that $160,000 in the bank and let the mathematicians tell you very quickly that that'll be worth, $2.7 million in 40 years. In spite of what everybody, some of the numbers they tell us are that you'll earn 2.7 times what you would without a college degree.
Sure.
But I think that discounts self-education.
Right.
So there's a whole bunch of themes for you. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think I worry too about where we're going because college costs just keep going up. I think student loan debt today we may be entering a kind of unsustainable level of indebtedness in higher education. We're straddling people with these enormous amounts. I mean, I remember my first year of college was, I worked during the summer and I could afford to pay my own college bills at the University of Massachusetts.
Just with 3 months' work?
Just from my own resources. I had some savings, but tuition was $250 a year back then.
What has happened?
Well, they say that anything that has, where there's a lot of personnel requirements, like health and hospitals and education, where there's personnel costs are critically important, you can't develop productivity gains easily. That's what is claimed. But I think that a lot of money is being spent on administration, both in health and in education, and I do think that there's a possibility for self-education and being an autodidactic. I think that your local libraries is a good source for education. I think that YouTube is a source of education. I think people can, instead of going through university-supported internships, they can take a job in a big organization and work their way up. I have as many fears and suspicions and doubts as you do, and I think having a sober understanding of the place of education, I think it's too easy to oversell education as being the be-all and end-all. It's one. It's one. The family, communities, policies, social policies, all of that contributes to health and well-being of communities and schools and young people. So yeah, I have all the fears that you do. That being said, I think that going back to those basics, there's no better way for schools to add value than to continuously appraise and reappraise what they're doing, how they're doing, and looking at the metrics, interrogating the data, finding out how we can do better. And that's that mindset of we can do better, we're going to do better. That's the critical element that's needed in schools today, whether we're talking about preschools or graduate schools. How can we serve students better and add that value? And that's how that gets answered is going to be different in different places, different times. But somebody's got to ask those questions. And sometimes the best person to ask those questions and to collect the data and to sort of massage the data, oftentimes is an outsider. Somebody like myself.
So tie us into Educrescer.
Yeah, well, I'm all about trying to do good in this world with a critically important area of education, teaching, and learning. At different levels, I've worked in all of those levels. I never taught at the elementary level, but I ran programs, grant-funded programs. Interesting, when I was in Cambridge, I ran a program that was all about career education at the elementary grade level. It was all about helping kids to understand what the world of work was all about and what their future prospects could be. And one of the things that I took pains back then to do was to validate the parents and what they did. So we went and had lots of parents come into the school and talk about what they did, including my own father. I had my father come in and talk about him driving a truck.
Yeah.
And I had gone with him and took pictures and so forth. But that kind of validation was critically important. And wouldn't you know it, I had the opportunity some years ago to go to the conference in Paris of the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, the people who put out the PISA international comparisons. It's a wonderful thing. But I met a group there from Uganda who are doing the same thing today, and I've been sort of consulting with them online through emails and so forth, and it's been a wonderful thing, and they've actually appreciated my inputs. So, yeah.
Wow, isn't that great? So, as we round out,
Yep.
I want to say thank you to the people in the background. We got Leo McGowan here in the cameras. We got Roy Cohen as a producer. We have Mike Hammond out sharing some of the production work, and Jeff Pickett, who does a lot of the behind-the-scenes stuff for us. So we want to thank
them all.
you, and we want to thank the people who are watching the show. Thanks for having a look at what we're trying to do here and trying to make a bit of sense-making about improving education. And again, thanks to Jorge Cardoso, and he is at Educrescer.
Yes,
Okay.
it's educrescer@gmail.com is the best way to reach me.
All right, thank you very much.
Yeah.